Two corrupt cops, one framed CIA agent, a perfect storm of justice. Detectives Mitchell and Larson thought framing a quiet black cybersecurity expert would be just another day's work in their corrupt empire. Plant the evidence, falsify the reports, watch another innocent life crumble. Simple, clean, routine. What they didn't know was that Isaiah Carter had been collecting evidence on their operation for months, that behind his unassuming facade lay one of the CIA's most lethal deep-cover operatives, that by arresting him, they'd just given him unprecedented access to their entire corrupt system. Now, as they mock him in his cell, confident in their power, Isaiah Carter waits patiently, because the perfect trap isn't the one you escape from. It's the one you're too blind to see until it snaps shut around you. The game is about to begin, and Atlanta's most corrupt cops are already 3 moves behind. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. The autumn breeze carried a hint of danger through downtown Atlanta as Isaiah Carter walked the familiar path to his sister's coffee shop. At first glance, he looked like any other professional. Crisp navy suit, leather messenger bag, and the confident stride of someone who belonged in the bustling business district. But there was more to Isaiah than met the eye. He paused outside, Tanya's shop, instinctively scanning the street before entering. The bell chimed softly as he pushed open the door, and the rich aroma of freshly ground coffee beans wrapped around him like a warm embrace. "There's my favorite brother," Tanya called out from behind the counter, her bright smile masking the concern in her eyes. She'd noticed the changes in him lately, the way his shoulders tensed when the door opened, how his eyes constantly swept the room, the long silences during their weekly dinners. Isaiah settled into his usual corner table, positioning himself with a clear view of both exits. His laptop screen reflected lines of code, but his attention was divided between his work and the street outside. To anyone watching, he appeared to be just another cybersecurity consultant buried in his work. In reality, each keystroke was cataloging evidence of corruption that went deeper than anyone suspected. "You look tired," Tanya said softly, placing his usual black coffee on the table. "When was the last time you actually slept?" "I sleep enough," Isaiah replied, offering a reassuring smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just busy with work." "That's what you always say." Tanya lingered at his table, studying his face. "You know you can talk to me if something's wrong, right?" Isaiah reached for her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "Everything's fine, sis. Just some complex projects I need to wrap up." If only he could tell her the truth, that for the past 6 months, he'd been working deep undercover for the CIA, building a case against a network of corrupt police officers who'd turned Atlanta's justice system into their personal playground. But that knowledge would only put her in danger. Across town, in a dimly lit office at the Atlanta Police Department, Detective Ryan Mitchell leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his graying hair as he reviewed the latest numbers from their operation. His partner, Scott Larson, paced the room, tension radiating from his muscular frame. "The feds are getting too close," Larson muttered, stopping to stare out the window. "That last operation was sloppy. If anyone starts asking the right questions," Mitchell cut him off with a dismissive wave. "They won't. We own this precinct, and the judge is on our payroll. We just need a clean fall guy to take the heat off us for a while." "Someone with no connections," Larson added, a cruel smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Someone nobody important will miss." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Officer Sarah Walker, one of the few honest cops left in the precinct, stood in the doorway with barely concealed disgust. "There's been another complaint about excessive force during an arrest in the 4th Ward. File it with Internal Affairs," Mitchell said coldly. "I'm sure they'll give it all the attention it deserves." The implied threat wasn't lost on Walker, who retreated without another word. Later that afternoon, Isaiah sat in his car outside Wilson Elementary School, waiting to pick up his niece Maya. His phone buzzed with an encrypted message from his CIA handler. "Evidence suggests imminent major operation. Stay alert." He deleted the message just as Maya bounded down the school steps, her backpack bouncing with each step. The sight of her innocent excitement brought a genuine smile to his face. These moments with his family were what he was fighting to protect. Uncle Isaiah. Maya climbed into the back seat, already launching into a story about her day. We learned about butterflies, and guess what? They start as caterpillars, but then they go into this thing called a chrysalis, and then... Isaiah listened, cherishing the normalcy of the moment. But as he pulled away from the curb, he noticed a familiar unmarked police car turning onto the street. His grip tightened on the steering wheel as he recognized Mitchell behind the wheel. "That's fascinating, sweetheart," he said, keeping his voice steady while maneuvering through traffic. "Tell me more about the chrysalis." He needed to get Maya home safely before dealing with whatever was coming. But fate had other plans. The traffic light ahead turned red, forcing him to stop beside an abandoned warehouse. In his rearview mirror, he saw Mitchell's car pull up behind him, followed by another police vehicle. His heart rate remained steady. Years of CIA training had taught him how to stay calm in crisis situations. "Maya, honey," he said quietly, "I need you to remember something important. Whatever happens next, you stay in the car and call your mom. Can you do that for me?" Before Maya could respond, bright lights flooded the car as multiple police vehicles surrounded them. Mitchell's voice boomed through a megaphone. "Driver, exit the vehicle with your hands where we can see them." Isaiah's mind raced through his options. He could reveal his CIA status, but that would compromise months of investigation. He could try to escape, but that would put Maya at risk. No, he had to play this smart. "Maya, call your mom now," he instructed, reaching slowly for his door handle. "Everything's going to be okay." The next few moments unfolded in a blur of violence. As soon as Isaiah's feet hit the pavement, Mitchell and Larson rushed him, slamming him face first into the ground. The impact split his lip, blood spattering on the concrete. "Look what we found," Larson announced triumphantly, pulling a package from his jacket and placing it near Isaiah's car. Mitchell quickly photographed the planted evidence while other officers kept their weapons trained on Isaiah. From inside the car, Maya's terrified screams pierced the air. Bystanders had gathered, several pulling out phones to record the arrest. Larson quickly moved to confiscate the devices, his badge becoming a weapon of intimidation. "Delete that footage," he ordered, "or you'll be joining him." Mitchell yanked Isaiah to his feet, deliberately wrenching his arm behind his back. "Isaiah Carter," he announced loudly for the gathering crowd. "You're under arrest for possession, with intent to distribute and illegal weapons possession." Isaiah remained silent as the handcuffs clicked into place. He caught a glimpse of Maya's tear-streaked face through the car window, and his heart ached. But he couldn't show any emotion. That's what they wanted. "Nothing to say?" Larson taunted, roughly shoving Isaiah toward the patrol car. "No claims of innocence? No, those aren't my drugs?" Isaiah's silence seemed to unnerve them. Most of their victims pleaded, protested, or fought back. His calm compliance didn't fit their narrative. At the precinct, they threw him into an interrogation room, expecting him to crack under pressure. Hour after hour, they tried every trick in their playbook. Threats, promises of leniency, attempts to play good cop, bad cop. "Nobody's coming to help you," Mitchell said, leaning close to Isaiah's face. "You're just another black man caught with drugs. Who do you think they'll believe? Two decorated detectives or you?" Larson chimed in from the corner. "You should have stayed in your lane, Carter. Now you're just another statistic." Little did they know, Isaiah was cataloging every word, every threat, building his own case even as they thought they were destroying him. His CIA training had prepared him for far worse than this. As night fell, the media circus began. Local news channels ran with the story their corrupt sources fed them. Respected cybersecurity expert revealed as drug dealer. They showed carefully selected photos that made Isaiah look menacing, ignoring his years of community service and professional achievements. In her coffee shop, Tanya watched the news coverage in horror, finally understanding her brother's recent behavior. She knew in her heart he was innocent, but the system seemed designed to destroy him. "I need to find him a lawyer," she muttered, pulling out her phone. "Someone who isn't afraid to take on the police." Meanwhile, in a secure facility across town, Isaiah's CIA handler watched the situation unfold with growing concern. The operation had taken an unexpected turn, but perhaps they could use this to their advantage. For now, Isaiah needed to maintain his cover, even if it meant spending time behind bars. Back in his cell, Isaiah sat quietly, his mind working through contingency plans. The evidence against him was fabricated but professional. Mitchell and Larson had done this before. Their confidence suggested protection from higher up in the system. A guard approached his cell, sliding a manila envelope through the bars. "Your preliminary hearing is tomorrow morning," he announced. "Prosecutors offering a deal, 5 years if you plead guilty. Otherwise, you're looking at 25 to life." Isaiah took the envelope without comment. Inside, buried among the legal documents, was a small note that would have been meaningless to anyone else. "Operation compromised. Maintain cover. Authority to proceed at discretion." As he lay on the hard prison cot that night, Isaiah could hear Mitchell and Larson celebrating in the distance, their laughter echoing through the precinct. They thought they'd won, thought they'd found the perfect scapegoat for their failed operation, but Isaiah Carter had spent years building cases against people who thought they were untouchable. As he closed his eyes, a subtle smile played across his lips. Mitchell and Larson had just made their biggest mistake. They'd given him a front-row seat to their entire operation. The stage was set for a battle that would shake the Atlanta Police Department to its core. But for now, Isaiah would wait, watch, and gather evidence. After all, the best operations required patience, and he had learned from the best. In her apartment across town, Maya hugged her mother tightly, still shaking from the day's events. "Why did they hurt Uncle Isaiah?" she asked through tears. "He didn't do anything wrong." Tanya stroked her daughter's hair, fighting back her own tears. "Sometimes bad people do bad things, baby, but your uncle is strong, and we're going to help him fight this." As the city slept, the wheels of injustice continued to turn. But beneath the surface, forces were gathering. Isaiah Carter might have been framed, but he was far from defeated. The truth would come out. It was only a matter of time. Dawn broke over the Atlanta Detention Center as Isaiah Carter sat motionless in his cell, his mind racing through the events of the previous day. The early morning light filtered through the narrow window, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. His carefully maintained composure hadn't wavered, even as he heard the whispers of other inmates discussing his case. The local news had done its job well. Everyone knew about the respected professional caught with drugs near an elementary school. The sound of heavy boots echoing down the corridor announced the arrival of Detective Mitchell, flanked by 2 corrections officers. His smug grin revealed yellowing teeth as he unlocked Isaiah's cell. "Rise and shine, Carter." "The system works fast when we want it to," Mitchell drawled, gesturing for Isaiah to stand. "Judge Thompson cleared his calendar specially for you. Preliminary hearing starts in 2 hours. Isaiah stood slowly, his face betraying nothing. Inside, his trained mind was already cataloging every detail: the judge's name, the unusually rapid processing, the subtle threat in Mitchell's tone. Each piece would become part of the larger puzzle he was assembling. Across town, Tanya paced her living room, phone pressed to her ear. "Please, Mr. Keller, I know it's early, but my brother needs help. They're pushing this through so fast we can barely think." David Keller, a civil rights attorney known for taking on police corruption cases, listened intently on the other end. His reputation for fearlessly challenging the system had made him both respected and feared in Atlanta's legal circles. "Ms. Carter," Keller's voice was steady and reassuring, "I've seen this pattern before. They're trying to railroad your brother before anyone can look too closely at the evidence. I'll be at the courthouse in an hour." Meanwhile, Detective Larson sat in the evidence room, carefully editing the security footage from a nearby business. The original tape showed Isaiah's car being approached by police without cause, but with a few careful cuts and some creative timestamps, it would tell a very different story. "Make sure this gets to the prosecutor's office immediately," Larson ordered a junior officer, handing over a USB drive. "And delete the original footage. Technical malfunction, if anyone asks." The young officer hesitated for a moment, his conscience, wrestling with the order, but one hard look from Larson made him comply. It wasn't the first time he'd been forced to participate in their schemes, and the memory of what happened to the last officer who refused still haunted the precinct. In the courthouse holding cell, Isaiah met his court-appointed defender, a weary-looking man named Thomas Walsh. "Look," Walsh sighed, shuffling through paperwork. "The prosecution is offering 5 years with possibility of parole in 3. Given the evidence they claim to have, it's a generous offer." "I won't be taking any deals," Isaiah replied calmly, his steady gaze making Walsh shift uncomfortably. "Mr. Carter, you need to understand your situation. They have surveillance footage, officer testimony, and physical evidence. Fighting this could mean 25 years. Think about your family." Before Isaiah could respond, the door opened and David Keller strode in, his presence immediately filling the small space. "Mr. Walsh, thank you for your time, but I'll be taking over Mr. Carter's defense." Walsh gathered his papers quickly, relief evident on his face. As he left, Keller turned to Isaiah, studying him intently. "Your sister hired me an hour ago. Now, before we proceed, I need to know one thing. What aren't you telling me?" Isaiah met Keller's gaze. "Everything I say is protected by attorney-client privilege?" "Absolutely." "Then let's just say there's more to this case than a simple drug bust, and certain agencies would prefer I maintain my current position for now." Understanding flickered across Keller's face. He'd handled enough sensitive cases to read between the lines. "I see. Then we'll play this very carefully." The preliminary hearing began with unusual haste. Judge Thompson, a man whose connections to corrupt officers were carefully hidden behind a facade of respectability, looked down from his bench with barely concealed disdain. Assistant District Attorney Sarah Reynolds presented the prosecution's case with rehearsed precision. "Your Honor, the evidence against Mr. Carter is overwhelming. Security footage shows him engaging in a drug transaction. Officers recovered a substantial quantity of narcotics and an illegal firearm from his vehicle. Given the proximity to an elementary school and his apparent use of his young niece as cover, we request denial of bail." Keller stood, his presence commanding attention. "Your Honor, the defense requests access to the original surveillance footage and body camera recordings from the arresting officers." "Unfortunately," Reynolds responded smoothly, "there were technical issues with the body cameras during the arrest. As for the surveillance footage, we've submitted the relevant segments to the court." "How convenient," Keller remarked, his tone causing Mitchell to shift uneasily in his seat. "And I assume these technical issues occurred after my client was observed allegedly making a drug deal, but before his violent arrest in front of his young niece?" Judge Thompson's gavel cracked sharply. "Mr. Keller, confine your comments to relevant legal matters. This court will not entertain unfounded accusations against respected officers." In the gallery, Tanya watched the proceedings with growing horror. The system's machinery was moving with frightening efficiency, each piece working in concert to bury her brother. Beside her, Maya sat quietly, still traumatized from witnessing her uncle's arrest. During a brief recess, Mitchell and Larson huddled with the prosecutor in a side chamber. "The judge is on board," Mitchell assured her, "but Keller's involvement complicates things. He has a habit of digging where he shouldn't." "Handle it," Reynolds replied curtly, gathering her files. "Just keep it clean. We can't afford another scandal." Larson's face darkened. "We know people who can convince him to back off." "No." Mitchell's response was sharp. "Keller has too high a profile. We do this by the book. Our book." Back in the courthouse hallway, a young man approached Tanya nervously. "Ms. Carter, I saw what happened yesterday. I recorded it on my phone." Hope flared in Tanya's eyes, but before she could respond, 2 plainclothes officers materialized beside them. "Sir, we need to speak with you about an unrelated matter," one said firmly, leading the witness away. Tanya never saw him again. The afternoon session began with the prosecution presenting their fabricated evidence. Doctored photographs showed bags of drugs carefully arranged next to Isaiah's car. The edited security footage painted a damning picture of furtive exchanges and suspicious behavior. Throughout the presentation, Isaiah remained impassive, his CIA training allowing him to maintain perfect composure even as lies piled up around him. His calm demeanor unsettled Mitchell and Larson, who were used to seeing defendants crack under pressure. During cross-examination, Keller began picking at loose threads. "Detective Mitchell, you testified that you observed Mr. Carter conducting a drug transaction. Yet the surveillance footage shows a full 3 minutes between the alleged transaction and your approach. Why the delay?" Mitchell's rehearsed response came quickly. "We needed to ensure the safety of civilians in the area, particularly given the proximity to the school." "And yet," Keller continued, "your report indicates no attempt to apprehend the alleged buyer. Curious priority choice." Judge Thompson intervened before Mitchell could respond. "Mr. Keller, the court reminds you that police tactical decisions are not on trial here." As the day wore on, Isaiah received another carefully worded note from his CIA handler: "Stand firm, asset in place." The message confirmed what he'd suspected. The agency was letting this play out, using his arrest to penetrate deeper into the corruption network. In the late afternoon, Judge Thompson made his ruling. Based on the evidence presented, this court finds probable cause to proceed to trial. Given the serious nature of the charges and the defendant's resources, bail is denied. Trial is set for 1 week from today. The rapidity of the schedule was unprecedented, but Keller's objection was quickly overruled. As court officers led Isaiah away, he caught a glimpse of Mitchell and Larson celebrating discreetly in the corner. That evening, in a private room at the detention center, Keller laid out their situation frankly. "They're moving faster than I've ever seen. Someone wants this wrapped up before we can mount a proper defense." "They're scared," Isaiah replied softly. "They should be." "The prosecution will offer another deal tomorrow," Keller continued. 5 years, maybe less, given what they've fabricated." "No deals," Isaiah interrupted. "Some things are worth the risk." Meanwhile, Mitchell and Larson weren't celebrating their victory yet. In a dimly lit bar across town, they discussed their next moves. "Something's not right about Carter," Larson muttered, nursing his third whiskey. "Most people would have broken by now." Mitchell nodded slowly. "We need insurance. Get someone inside to provoke him. 1 fight, that's all we need to add assault charges." "Already arranged," Larson replied. "Jackson owes us a favor. His cousin's in the same block as Carter." In her empty coffee shop, Tanya sat with Maya, trying to maintain a brave face. "Uncle Isaiah is the strongest person I know," she assured her daughter. "He'll get through this." "But why are they lying about him?" Maya asked, her young mind struggling to understand the injustice. "Why won't they listen?" Tanya pulled her daughter close, fighting back tears. "Sometimes bad people have power they shouldn't have, but the truth always comes out eventually." As night fell over Atlanta, the various players in this unfolding drama prepared for their next moves. In his cell, Isaiah reviewed everything he'd observed, mentally updating his assessment of the corruption's reach. The CIA's patience in letting him maintain cover suggested they saw an opportunity to expose something bigger than just 2 corrupt detectives. Keller worked late into the night, his office littered with similar cases, all involving Mitchell and Larson, all ending in convictions based on surprisingly consistent evidence patterns. The attorney's trained eye began noting details others had missed, building a picture of systematic corruption. Mitchell and Larson slept uneasily, their dreams haunted by the nagging feeling that they'd chosen the wrong target this time. Their usual victims were vulnerable, desperate, easily pressured into deals. Isaiah Carter was something else entirely. In the darkness of his cell, Isaiah allowed himself a brief smile. Years of CIA training had taught him that sometimes the best way to expose a corrupt system was to let it believe it had won. Mitchell and Larson had built their empire on the assumption that their victims were powerless. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. As the first light of dawn approached, Isaiah received one final message hidden in his breakfast tray. Position: compromised. Continue current course. Authorization granted for full disclosure when tactical advantage presents. The pieces were in place. The next move would be crucial. Isaiah closed his eyes, appearing to sleep while his mind worked through countless scenarios. In the game of chess he was playing, he'd just sacrificed his queen to draw out his opponent's true strategy. Now it was time to spring the trap. The Atlanta courthouse buzzed with tension on the trial's opening day. News vans lined the street outside, their satellite dishes reaching toward the gray morning sky like metal trees. Inside, the marble halls echoed with whispered conversations and hurried footsteps as people filed into the courtroom. Isaiah Carter sat at the defense table, his posture relaxed but alert. His pressed prison uniform and steady gaze projected a dignity that confused onlookers who'd expected to see a broken man. Beside him, David Keller arranged his documents with methodical precision, occasionally glancing at the prosecution table, where Assistant DA Sarah Reynolds consulted with Detectives Mitchell and Larson. In the gallery, Tanya sat with Maya, both dressed in their Sunday best. Maya clutched a small notebook where she'd been drawing pictures of butterflies, trying to remember happier days with her uncle. Behind them, several rows were filled with uniformed police officers, a not-so-subtle show of force. Judge Thompson entered, his robe swishing as he took his seat. "Are both sides ready to proceed?" "Ready for the people, Your Honor." Reynolds stood, smoothing her jacket. "Ready for the defense," Keller responded, his deep voice carrying authority. Reynolds approached the jury box, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about betrayal. Isaiah Carter built a facade of respectability, a successful career, a clean record, a caring uncle. But beneath that facade lurked a criminal who used his position to traffic drugs near an elementary school." She gestured dramatically toward Isaiah. "The evidence will show that Mr. Carter was caught red-handed with a substantial quantity of narcotics and an illegal firearm. 2 decorated police officers will testify about witnessing him conduct a drug transaction. Security footage will confirm their account. By the end of this trial, you'll understand that sometimes the most dangerous criminals are the ones who hide in plain sight." Keller's opening statement took a different approach. He stood slowly, walking to the center of the courtroom, with measured steps. "This case is indeed about betrayal, but not the kind Ms. Reynolds describes. It's about the betrayal of public trust by those sworn to protect it. The defense will show that my client was framed by corrupt officers who've done this before. We'll expose how evidence was fabricated, witnesses were intimidated, and the truth was buried under an avalanche of lies." Mitchell shifted uncomfortably in his seat as Keller continued. "Most importantly, we'll reveal why Isaiah Carter was chosen as their target and what these officers were trying to hide. By the end of this trial, you'll understand that sometimes the real criminals are the ones wearing badges." Judge Thompson frowned. "Mr. Keller, you're skating on thin ice with these accusations." "Just stating what the evidence will show, Your Honor." Reynolds called her first witness, Detective Ryan Mitchell. He took the stand with practiced confidence, reciting his credentials. 20 years on the force, dozens of commendations, a record of successful drug busts that had earned him a reputation as one of Atlanta's finest. "Detective Mitchell," Reynolds began, "please tell us about the events leading to Mr. Carter's arrest." Mitchell leaned forward, his voice carrying authority. "We'd received intelligence about drug activity near Wilson Elementary. During surveillance, we observed Mr. Carter engage in what appeared to be a drug transaction. When we approached to investigate, we discovered a significant quantity of narcotics and an unregistered firearm in his vehicle." "And how did the defendant respond during the arrest?" "He was unusually calm," Mitchell replied, glancing at Isaiah. "Most suspects show some emotion, fear, anger, denial. Carter just watched us. It was unsettling, like he was studying everything we did." Keller stood for cross-examination, holding a thick folder. "Detective Mitchell, you mentioned receiving intelligence about drug activity. Can you elaborate on the source?" "That information is confidential to protect our informants." "Interesting," Keller replied, opening his folder. "Because according to police records, there were no registered confidential informants providing intelligence about that location in the 6 months prior to Mr. Carter's arrest." Reynolds jumped up. "Objection! Those records are classified." "Overruled," Judge Thompson said reluctantly, aware of the federal subpoena Keller had obtained. The witness will answer. Mitchell's confidence wavered slightly. Sometimes we receive anonymous tips. Anonymous tips that just happen to lead you to arrest an innocent man who parks near a staged crime scene? Keller pressed. Objection argumentative. Sustained. Watch yourself, Mr. Keller. The questioning continued, with Keller methodically exposing small inconsistencies in Mitchell's story. Why weren't other officers called for backup before approaching a suspected drug dealer? Why was there no attempt to apprehend the alleged buyer? How did the surveillance footage happen to malfunction during key moments? Detective Larson was next on the stand, his testimony matching Mitchell's almost word for word. Too perfectly, Keller noted, as if rehearsed. During cross-examination, Keller produced documents showing similar patterns in previous arrests, surveillance equipment failing at crucial moments, missing body cam footage, evidence logged without proper documentation. Detective Larson, Keller asked, "Are you familiar with Marcus Johnson?" Larson tensed. "The name doesn't ring a bell." "Really?" "Because Mr. Johnson was arrested by you and Detective Mitchell last year under remarkably similar circumstances." Drugs. Planted in his car, surveillance footage conveniently damaged, witnesses pressured to stay quiet. The only difference is that Mr. Johnson accepted a plea deal out of fear. "Objection," Reynolds shouted. "Previous cases are not relevant." "They establish a pattern of behavior, Your Honor," Keller argued. Judge Thompson's gavel cracked. Sustained. The jury will disregard references to other cases, but the damage was done. Several jurors exchanged glances, doubt creeping into their expressions. During the lunch recess, Mitchell and Larson huddled with Reynolds in a conference room. "He's getting too close," Larson hissed. "If he starts connecting the dots..." "Stay calm," Reynolds advised. "The judge is on our side, besides we have the security footage." When court resumed, Reynolds played their trump card, the edited surveillance video showing Isaiah's car at the scene. The footage had been carefully manipulated to suggest suspicious activity, but something about the timestamps caught the attention of juror number 4, a software engineer who frowned as she studied the time codes. Keller requested permission to have an independent expert analyze the footage. Judge Thompson initially refused, but Keller was prepared. He produced a federal court order requiring examination of all evidence by an independent forensics team. "Your Honor," Keller announced, "I've also subpoenaed the original body cam footage from the precinct's secure servers." Mitchell's face paled. They deleted the local copies, but the automatic cloud backup was beyond their reach. Larson shot him a panicked look. The afternoon brought a parade of prosecution witnesses, fellow officers testifying to finding drugs in Isaiah's car, evidence technicians confirming the presence of illegal substances, experts explaining the street value of the seized narcotics. Each testimony seemed solid on the surface, but Keller's cross-examinations began exposing the facade. "Officer Williams," he asked one witness, "you testified that you photographed the evidence exactly as it was found. Yet these time-stamped photos show the drugs in different positions. Can you explain this discrepancy?" The young officer stumbled over his words, looking to Mitchell for guidance. We might have moved things for better documentation. Or perhaps," Keller suggested, "you photographed planted evidence multiple times until it looked convincing." "Objection." "Withdrawn," Keller said smoothly, but the implication lingered. As the day wore on, Isaiah maintained his composed demeanor, watching each witness with analytical precision. His CIA training allowed him to detect subtle signs of deception. Mitchell's slight jaw clench when lying, Larson's tendency to touch his collar when nervous, the way certain officers avoided eye contact during crucial testimony. During the afternoon break, Keller received an urgent message from his office. The forensics team had found irregularities in the surveillance footage, clear signs of digital manipulation. Additionally, a technician had recovered fragments of the original body cam footage from the precinct's server. "We need to be careful how we play this," Keller told Isaiah privately. "If we reveal everything at once, they might try something desperate." Isaiah nodded. "They're already getting nervous. Mitchell's been making calls during every recess." In the courthouse hallway, Tanya overheard two officers discussing the case. "Mitchell's losing it," one whispered. If this goes south, he's talking about taking matters into his own hands. The afternoon session began with a surprise. A man in a suit entered the courtroom, handed Judge Thompson a document, then took a seat in the gallery. The judge's expression darkened as he read the paper. "Ms. Reynolds, approach the bench," he ordered. "Defense counsel as well." The sidebar conference was tense, with Reynolds gesturing emphatically while Keller stood calmly. When they returned to their tables, Reynolds looked shaken. "Your Honor," she announced, "the state requests a brief continuance to review newly discovered evidence." "Denied," Thompson replied, his tone suggesting he knew the real reason for the request. "Proceed with your next witness." The prosecution's case was unraveling. Each witness seemed less certain than the last, and the jury's skepticism grew visible. During the final hour, a junior officer broke down under Keller's questioning, admitting that he'd been pressured to corroborate Mitchell and Larson's version of events. "They said my career would be over if I didn't play along," the young officer testified, his voice trembling. "They said worse things could happen to officers who didn't understand the system." Mitchell stormed out of the courtroom, leaving Larson to sink lower in his chair. In the gallery, several officers quietly left, distancing themselves from what they now recognized as a sinking ship. As the day drew to a close, Judge Thompson appeared increasingly agitated. The federal presence in his courtroom suggested that higher authorities were taking an interest in the case, authorities beyond his influence. "Court will resume tomorrow at 9 a.m., he announced, avoiding eye contact with Mitchell and Larson. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed the departing participants. Keller fielded questions with professional restraint, while Reynolds hurried to her car without comment. Mitchell and Larson were nowhere to be seen. Tanya hugged her brother before deputies led him back to detention. "You're winning," she whispered. "I can feel it." "It's not about winning," Isaiah replied softly. "It's about exposing the truth." Back in his cell that evening, Isaiah received another coded message. Phase 2 initiated. External assets in position. Maintain current strategy. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit bar across town, Mitchell and Larson argued about their options. "We need to end this now," Larson insisted, "before everything comes out." "It's too late for that," Mitchell replied, staring into his whiskey. "Someone higher up is involved. Can't you feel it? Carter's not just some random target. We walked right into something bigger." In her hotel room, juror number 4 carefully reviewed her notes from the day's testimony, her software engineer's mind cataloging inconsistencies in the surveillance footage timestamps. Something about this case wasn't adding up, and she was determined to understand why. David Keller worked late into the night, preparing for the next day's proceedings. His investigator had located a potential witness, someone who'd seen the original, unedited body cam footage before it was deleted. The question was whether they could get them to testify before Mitchell and Larson found out. As midnight approached, Isaiah lay on his cot, reviewing the day's events. The CIA's patience in letting him maintain his cover suggested they saw an opportunity to expose corruption beyond just 2 dirty cops. The presence of federal observers in the courtroom confirmed his suspicions. This case was becoming something much larger than Mitchell and Larson had intended. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The prosecution would be desperate, which made them dangerous. But Isaiah had spent his career dealing with dangerous people. As he closed his eyes, he allowed himself a small smile. Mitchell and Larson thought they were running this show, but they were actually bit players in a much bigger performance. The real drama was just beginning. Morning sunlight streamed through the high courthouse windows as Isaiah Carter whispered something to David Keller that made the attorney's eyebrows rise. The courtroom was packed, with every bench filled and spectators standing along the walls. News of yesterday's revelations had spread, drawing more media attention and curious onlookers. Detectives Mitchell and Larson sat behind the prosecution table, their faces drawn with tension. They'd spent a sleepless night destroying documents and making contingency plans. But the growing federal presence in the courthouse suggested their efforts might be too late. Judge Thompson entered, his usual authoritative stride diminished by visible anxiety. Before he could speak, Keller rose. "Your Honor, The defense requests permission to recall Mr. Carter to the stand. Reynolds jumped up. Objection. The defense hasn't presented its case yet. This is highly irregular. Given yesterday's developments, Keller argued, and new evidence that has come to light, Mr. Carter's testimony is immediately relevant. Thompson's gavel cracked sharply. Approach the bench, both of you. During the heated sidebar discussion, Isaiah remained perfectly still. His eyes fixed on Mitchell and Larson. Years of CIA training had taught him to recognize the signs of men about to break. Mitchell's right hand kept twitching toward his phone, while Larson's knee bounced with barely contained nervous energy. Very well, Thompson announced, his voice carrying a hint of resignation. The court will allow it. Mr. Carter, please take the stand. Isaiah walked to the witness box with measured steps. After being sworn in, he sat with the same calm composure he'd maintained throughout the trial. Keller approached, adjusting his tie. Mr. Carter, are you prepared to tell the court what you do for a living? Yes, Isaiah replied, his voice clear and steady. I am an operations officer with the Central Intelligence Agency, currently working undercover to investigate police corruption in Atlanta. The courtroom erupted. Spectators gasped and murmured, reporters scrambled for their phones, and Mitchell knocked over a water pitcher as he stood abruptly. Judge Thompson's gavel cracked repeatedly as he called for order. Your Honor, Reynolds shouted over the chaos, this is absolutely ridiculous. Anyone can claim to be a CIA agent. We demand proof. Before Thompson could respond, the courtroom doors opened. A tall woman in a crisp suit entered, followed by two men carrying briefcases. She walked directly to the bench and presented a document. I am Catherine Morrison, Chief Legal Counsel for the Central Intelligence Agency's Domestic Operations Division. This is a certified letter confirming Mr. Carter's status and authorizing him to disclose his role in ongoing investigations. Mitchell's face had gone ashen. He grabbed Larson's arm, whispering urgently, but Larson shook him off. Their careful plans were unraveling faster than they could process. Keller continued his questioning. Mr. Carter, how long have you been investigating Detectives Mitchell and Larson? 8 months, Isaiah replied. The CIA received intelligence suggesting that certain Atlanta police officers were running a sophisticated drug extortion operation. They were targeting vulnerable citizens, particularly people of color, planting evidence and forcing them into plea deals. And why did the CIA take an interest in what appears to be a local matter? Because the operation extended beyond Atlanta. We discovered links to international drug cartels and money laundering operations involving corrupt law enforcement across multiple jurisdictions. Reynolds stood again. Your Honor, this is beyond the scope of the current charges. On the contrary, Keller countered, it goes directly to motive. The defendants didn't randomly choose Mr. Carter. They targeted him because he was getting too close to their operation. In the gallery, Tanya watched with a mixture of pride and concern. The brother she thought she knew so well had been living a double life, fighting corruption from the shadows. Maya squeezed her hand, whispering, I knew Uncle Isaiah was a hero. Judge Thompson's complexion had taken on a grayish tinge. As a man who'd accepted bribes to keep the corrupt system running, he suddenly realized he was caught in a much larger investigation than he'd imagined. Mr. Carter, Keller continued, please tell the court about the events leading to your arrest. Isaiah leaned forward slightly. For months I'd been gathering evidence of Detective Mitchell and Larson's illegal activities. They would identify vulnerable targets, plant drugs in their vehicles, and arrest them near schools to maximize charges. Those who couldn't afford bail were pressured into plea deals, while those who resisted faced additional charges or worse. Worse how? Several potential witnesses against them disappeared. Others were found with planted evidence, similar to my case. Through electronic surveillance, we documented meetings between the detectives and known cartel members. Money traced. From these meetings moved through a complex network of offshore accounts. Mitchell stood suddenly. This is all lies. He can't prove any of this. Actually, Isaiah replied calmly, I can. He turned to Morrison, who nodded to one of her associates. The man opened his briefcase and removed a thick folder. This contains 8 months of surveillance logs, financial records, and witness statements, Morrison announced. all properly obtained through federal warrants and verified by multiple agencies. Larson had begun to sweat visibly. His eyes darted between the exits as Morrison continued. We have audio recordings of Detective Mitchell arranging drug shipments, video of Detective Larson accepting payoffs, and documentation of Judge Thompson dismissing cases in exchange for payments to offshore accounts. The judge's gavel slammed down. This is outrageous. I will not allow— You don't have a choice, Your Honor, Morrison interrupted. Federal agents are currently executing search warrants at multiple locations, including your chambers. The FBI has been building a parallel case for months. The courtroom doors opened again as several FBI agents entered, their badges displayed prominently. One approached the prosecution table with a warrant, while others moved to secure the exits. Reynolds, seeing the writing on the wall, stood quickly. Your Honor, the state requests a recess to review this new evidence. The evidence is quite clear, Isaiah said, his voice carrying through the stunned courtroom. Detectives Mitchell and Larson didn't just frame me. They've been running a criminal enterprise under the protection of corrupt officials, destroying lives and undermining justice for profit. Mitchell suddenly lunged forward, reaching for his ankle holster, but FBI agents had him pinned before he could grab the hidden weapon. Larson raised his hands slowly, the fight gone from his eyes. I want a deal, Larson announced, ignoring Mitchell's look of betrayal. I can give you names, dates, everything. Keller turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're witnessing isn't just the unraveling of a false case against my client. It's the exposure of a corrupt system that has operated with impunity for years. One of the jurors, an elderly woman who'd been taking detailed notes throughout the trial, raised her hand. Your Honor, given these revelations, do we still need to deliberate? Before Thompson could respond, Morrison stepped forward again. Your Honor, given the extent of the corruption exposed here, the United States Attorney's Office is assuming jurisdiction of this case. All charges against Isaiah Carter are hereby dismissed. The courtroom erupted once more, but this time with applause. Tanya rushed forward to embrace her brother as he stepped down from the witness stand. Maya joined them, wrapping her arms around Isaiah's waist. Why didn't you tell us? Tanya whispered. I couldn't, Isaiah replied softly. The less you knew, the safer you were. Meanwhile, FBI agents were leading Mitchell and Larson away in handcuffs. Judge Thompson sat frozen on the bench, watching his carefully constructed world collapse around him. Another agent approached, carrying additional restraints. Judge Thompson, the agent announced, you're under arrest for conspiracy, corruption, and obstruction of justice. Outside the courthouse, news crews jostled for position as the story broke. Local stations interrupted regular programming to report on the massive corruption scandal unfolding in real time. Reporters couldn't get over the irony. Two corrupt cops had inadvertently exposed their entire operation by trying to frame a CIA agent. In a quiet corner of the courthouse, Isaiah met with Morrison and his CIA handler. The operation exceeded expectations, Morrison noted. We not only exposed the local corruption but identified links to 3 international cartels. What happens now? Isaiah asked. The FBI takes the lead on domestic prosecutions while we pursue the international connections. Your cover is obviously blown, but your work here has opened doors we've been trying to crack for years. Keller joined them, carrying his briefcase. I've had some unusual cases, but this one takes the cake. How long have you been planning this? The CIA suspected corruption in Atlanta law enforcement for months, Isaiah explained. But we needed a way to expose it that would stand up in court. When Mitchell and Larson targeted me, they gave us the perfect opportunity. They never stood a chance, did they? Isaiah smiled slightly. They thought they were choosing an easy target. Instead, they chose the one person who could bring down their entire operation. Throughout the afternoon, more arrests were made as federal agents moved through the police department and courthouse, taking dozens of corrupt officials into custody. Officers who had participated in Mitchell and Larson's schemes rushed to make deals, offering evidence against higher-ranking conspirators. The honest cops who had stayed silent out of fear began coming forward, sharing stories of intimidation and coercion. Officer Sarah Walker, who had tried to report misconduct before, provided crucial testimony about how the corrupt system had maintained its power through threats and blackmail. In the precinct evidence room, FBI technicians discovered years of falsified records, planted evidence, and doctored body camera footage. The scale of the corruption was staggering. Hundreds of innocent people had been wrongly convicted based on fabricated evidence. Tanya's coffee shop became an impromptu gathering place for reporters and supporters. She served free coffee to Daitinais, federal agents and journalists, while Maya proudly told anyone who would listen about her uncle, the secret agent. "I always knew there was something special about him," Tanya overheard one regular customer say. "He had this way of watching everything, like he was solving a puzzle none of us could see." By evening, the story had gone national. Cable news networks ran dramatic headlines. CIA agent exposed massive police corruption ring, and corrupt cops' perfect target turns out to be their worst nightmare. Isaiah watched the coverage from a secure location, already preparing for his next assignment. The CIA had other operations in progress, other corrupt systems to expose. But this case would always be special. It had allowed him to protect not just his country, but his family and community. As night fell over Atlanta, the city buzzed with a mixture of shock, anger, and hope. The exposure of such widespread corruption was devastating, but it also represented an opportunity for real change. Already, community leaders were calling for comprehensive police reform and independent oversight. In their holding cells, Mitchell and Larson faced the consequences of their actions. Mitchell maintained his sullen silence while Larson spent hours talking to federal prosecutors, revealing the full extent of their operation. The man who had once mockingly called Isaiah just another statistic now found himself becoming one, another corrupt cop facing federal charges. Judge Thompson, stripped of his robes and authority, sat in federal custody, awaiting transfer to a facility outside Atlanta. His decades of enabling corruption had finally caught up with him, and the same system he had perverted would now be used to bring him to justice. David Keller received dozens of calls from other potential clients, people who had been victimized by Mitchell and Larson's operation. He promised to review every case, knowing that many wrongful convictions would need to be overturned. In Tanya's living room, Maya carefully removed her drawings of butterflies from the notebook she'd carried throughout the trial. "The butterfly, in my science class," she said thoughtfully. "It had to stay in its chrysalis until it was ready to come out. Just like Uncle Isaiah had to keep his secret until the right time." Tanya hugged her daughter, marveling at her insight. "That's right, baby. Sometimes the biggest changes happen when we least expect them." Isaiah's CIA handler reviewed the operation's outcome with satisfaction. What had started as an investigation into local corruption had exposed links to international criminal networks. Sometimes the smallest threads, when pulled properly, could unravel the largest conspiracies. As the city settled into an uneasy sleep, the wheels of justice continued turning. Federal agents worked through the night, securing evidence and processing arrests. The corrupt system that had seemed so invincible just days ago now lay exposed and broken. Isaiah Carter, the quiet CIA agent who had brought it all down, allowed himself a moment of reflection. His work wasn't over. It never really would be. But tonight, at least, the good guys had won a significant victory. The truth had finally come out, and Atlanta would never be the same. The shockwaves from Isaiah Carter's CIA revelation rippled through the Atlanta courthouse like an earthquake. Spectators who had witnessed the dramatic scene spilled into the hallways, their excited chatter echoing off marble walls. Journalists frantically typed on their phones, racing to break the story that would soon dominate national headlines. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere crackled with tension. Detective Mitchell sat rigid in his chair, his face a mask of barely contained rage. His partner, Larson, had already begun to crack, his eyes darting between the federal agents positioned at every exit. The corrupt system they'd helped build was collapsing around them, and there was nowhere left to run. Judge Thompson's attempts to maintain order had become increasingly desperate. His gavel strikes echoed through the chamber like gunshots, but they couldn't drown out the murmurs of shock and excitement that followed each new revelation. "This court will have order," Thompson shouted, his voice cracking. The same authoritative tone that had once silenced countless defendants now rang hollow. The power he'd wielded so confidently was slipping through his fingers like sand. Catherine Morrison, the CIA's chief legal counsel, stood calmly at the center of the storm. Her presence represented something the corrupt officials had never expected to face: federal oversight beyond their influence. She turned to address the judge directly. "Your Honor, I have here federal warrants authorizing the immediate seizure of all records from your chambers, as well as those of Detectives Mitchell and Larson." She handed the documents to a court officer. Additionally, FBI teams are currently executing simultaneous raids at multiple locations throughout Atlanta. The prosecutor, Sarah Reynolds, had gone pale. She shuffled through her papers with trembling hands, knowing that her own role in the corruption would soon be exposed. The case she'd built against Isaiah was disintegrating, and with it, her career. In the gallery, Tanya held Maya close, watching her brother with a mixture of pride and amazement. All those times she'd worried about him, all those subtle changes in his behavior, everything made sense now. Maya looked up at her uncle with wide eyes, seeing him in a completely new light. "The United States Attorney's Office," Morrison continued, "is assuming immediate jurisdiction of this case. Furthermore, we are initiating a comprehensive investigation into systemic corruption within the Atlanta Police Department and judicial system." Mitchell suddenly lurched to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is all lies," he shouted, his face reddening. "You can't just walk in here and—" "Detective Mitchell," Morrison cut him off coldly, "I suggest you sit down and remain silent. Your situation is already dire enough." Isaiah watched the scene unfold with the calculated patience of a trained operative. From his position at the defense table, he could observe every reaction, every subtle tell that revealed the depth of corruption they were about to expose. Larson cracked first, just as Isaiah had predicted. "I want immunity," he blurted out, ignoring Mitchell's murderous glare. "I can give you everything. Names, dates, locations, the whole operation. You rat bastard." Mitchell lunged at his former partner, but FBI agents intercepted him before he could reach Larson. The courtroom erupted into chaos as Mitchell struggled against the agents, screaming threats and accusations. Judge Thompson banged his gavel frantically. "This court is in recess. Clear the room immediately." "I'm afraid that won't be possible, Your Honor," Morrison stated firmly. "Federal agents need to secure this courtroom and all its contents as a crime scene, including your bench, the color." Drained from Thompson's face as he realized the full implications of her words. His decades of accepting bribes, dismissing cases, and protecting corrupt officers had finally caught up with him. David Keller stood, his commanding presence drawing all eyes. "Your Honor, given these extraordinary circumstances, I move for an immediate dismissal of all charges against my client." Before Thompson could respond, more FBI agents entered the courtroom, one approaching the bench with handcuffs visible at his belt. "Judge William Thompson," the agent announced formally, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, obstruction of justice, and racketeering under the RICO Act." The gallery erupted in gasps and exclamations as the judge was led away in handcuffs. Reporters sketched frantically, capturing the historic moment when one of Atlanta's most powerful judicial figures fell from grace. Outside the courthouse, news helicopters circled overhead as crowds began to gather. Word of the corruption scandal spread rapidly through social media, drawing protesters, curious onlookers, and media from across the region. Back inside, Isaiah finally allowed himself a small smile. Months of careful planning had led to this moment. When Mitchell and Larson had chosen to frame him, they'd unknowingly triggered their own downfall. Morrison approached Isaiah, speaking in low tones. "The operation exceeded our expectations. We've already identified links to corruption in 3 other major cities. Your cover here is blown, but the intelligence gathered is invaluable." Tanya made her way to her brother, Maya close behind. "All this time," she said softly, "you were fighting for justice in ways we couldn't see." "I wanted to tell you," Isaiah replied, embracing them both. "But keeping you in the dark was the only way to keep you safe." Meanwhile, Larson had begun singing like a canary to federal prosecutors. Each revelation painted a picture of corruption more extensive than anyone had imagined. The drug operation was just the tip of the iceberg. There were connections to money laundering, human trafficking, and international criminal organizations. Mitchell, now handcuffed and seated between two FBI agents, glared at his former partner with undisguised hatred. The brotherhood of corruption that had once seemed unbreakable was shattering under the weight of federal pressure. Sarah Reynolds tried to slip quietly out of the courtroom, but found her path blocked by federal agents. "Ms. Reynolds," one said, firmly, "we'll need you to accompany us for questioning regarding your role in several cases involving Detectives Mitchell and Larson." Throughout the courthouse, similar scenes played out as federal agents moved systematically through the building. Corrupt clerks, bailiffs, and administrators who had facilitated the criminal enterprise found themselves facing serious questions about their activities. Officer Sarah Walker, who had tried to report misconduct in the past, emerged from the gallery to approach the federal prosecutors. "I have documentation," she said quietly. "Records of every time I tried to report them, and every time it was buried." In the evidence room, FBI technicians began the painstaking process of documenting years of falsified records. They discovered hundreds of cases involving planted evidence, thousands of hours of edited body camera footage, and detailed records of bribes paid to judges and prosecutors. David Keller received a flood of calls from other defense attorneys, whose clients might have been wrongly convicted by the corrupt system. "We're looking at potentially hundreds of cases that need to be reviewed," he told reporters gathering outside. "This could be the largest mass exoneration in state history." Throughout the afternoon, more arrests followed. FBI teams raided homes and offices across Atlanta, leading away corrupt officials in handcuffs as news cameras rolled. The carefully constructed hierarchy of corruption that had seemed untouchable just days ago was crumbling like a house of cards. At the police precinct, honest officers watched in stunned silence as their corrupt colleagues were led away. Some felt relief that the shadow hanging over their department might finally be lifted. Others worried about the stain this would leave on all law enforcement. Tanya's coffee shop became an impromptu gathering place for journalists and community members. Following the story, Maya helped serve coffee while proudly telling anyone who would listen about her uncle, the CIA agent who had exposed the truth. "I always knew there was something special about him," one regular customer remarked. "He had this way of watching everything, like he could see things others missed." Isaiah's CIA handler arrived late in the afternoon to begin debriefing him. The operation had grown far beyond its original scope, exposing corruption that reached into the highest levels of Atlanta's government. "We've already identified similar patterns in other cities," the handler explained. "Your work here could help us root out corruption across the country." As evening approached, the full scale of the day's events began to sink in. News channels ran continuous coverage of the unfolding scandal, with legal experts and commentators struggling to explain the unprecedented situation. In federal holding cells, the former pillars of Atlanta's corrupt system faced the consequences of their actions. Judge Thompson sat alone in his cell, his judicial robes replaced by an orange jumpsuit. Mitchell and Larson were kept separated, their former partnership destroyed by betrayal. The FBI's evidence team worked through the night, documenting and securing thousands of files, recordings, and digital records. Each piece of evidence revealed new layers of corruption, new connections to investigate. Community leaders gathered at City Hall, demanding reforms and accountability. The exposure of such widespread corruption had shaken public trust, but it also presented an opportunity for real change. Isaiah watched the coverage from a secure location, already preparing for his next assignment. The CIA had other operations in progress, other corrupt systems to expose. But this case would always be special. It had allowed him to protect not just his country, but his family and community. Tanya closed her coffee shop late that night, her mind still processing everything that had happened. She found Maya in the back room, drawing pictures of her uncle in a superhero cape. "He's better than a superhero," Tanya told her daughter. "He's someone who fights for what's right, even when no one knows he's doing it." As night fell over Atlanta, the city buzzed with a mixture of shock, anger, and hope. The exposure of such widespread corruption was devastating, but it also represented an opportunity for real change. Already, Community leaders were calling for comprehensive police reform and independent oversight. In their holding cells, Mitchell and Larson faced the consequences of their actions. Mitchell maintained his sullen silence, while Larson spent hours talking to federal prosecutors, revealing the full extent of their operation. The man who had once mockingly called Isaiah just another statistic now found himself becoming another corrupt cop facing federal charges. The FBI's investigation continued through the night, with agents working in shifts to process the mountain of evidence. Each new discovery painted a clearer picture of how deeply corruption had infected Atlanta's justice system. David Keller's phone rang constantly as more potential cases of wrongful conviction came to light. He promised to review every case, knowing that many innocent people had been imprisoned by the corrupt system. In the secure federal building where Isaiah was being debriefed, CIA analysts began mapping the connections between Atlanta's corruption and international criminal networks. What had started as a local investigation had uncovered threads that led to drug cartels, money laundering operations, and human trafficking rings across multiple countries. Morrison met with the U.S. Attorney's office planning the next phases of the investigation. "This goes beyond Atlanta," she explained. "We're seeing similar patterns of corruption in other major cities. This could be the beginning of a nationwide cleanup." As midnight approached, the city finally began to quiet, but the machinery of justice continued grinding forward. Federal agents worked through the night securing evidence and processing arrests. The corrupt system that had seemed so invincible just days ago now lay exposed and broken. Isaiah Carter, the quiet CIA agent who had brought it all down, allowed himself a moment of reflection. His work wasn't over. It never really would be. But tonight, at least, the good guys had won a significant victory. The truth had finally come out, and Atlanta would never be the same. The house of cards had collapsed, and from its ruins, perhaps something better could be built. A system based on justice rather than corruption, on truth rather than power. As he prepared for whatever mission would come next, Isaiah knew that his exposure of corruption in Atlanta would have far-reaching consequences. Other corrupt officials in other cities would soon learn to fear the quiet observers in their midst, never knowing when their own house of cards might come tumbling down. The night ended as it had begun, with the promise of change. But now that promise carried the weight of action behind it, the force of justice finally served, and the hope of a better tomorrow. Detective Ryan Mitchell sat alone in a federal holding cell, his police badge and gun long since confiscated. The harsh fluorescent lights cast unforgiving shadows across his face as he wrestled with the reality of his situation. 20 years of carefully constructed corruption were crumbling, and he knew there was only one way out. Down the hall, in a separate interrogation room, Scott Larson had already begun talking to federal prosecutors. His desperate attempts to save himself had only scratched the surface of their operation. Mitchell could hear his former partner's muffled voice through the walls, each word another nail in their collective coffin. "I want to make a deal," Mitchell announced when the federal prosecutor finally entered his cell. "But I want full immunity, and I want it in writing. What I know goes way beyond anything Larson can tell you." The prosecutor, a sharp-featured woman named Rachel Moore, studied him carefully. "Why should we trust you more than your partner?" Mitchell leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Because I can give you Judge Thompson's entire network. Names, dates, offshore accounts, everything. Larson was just muscle. I was the one handling the real business." In the main courthouse, now transformed into a federal command center, Isaiah Carter reviewed surveillance footage with his CIA handler. They watched as years of corrupt dealings played out on multiple screens, each video adding another piece to the puzzle. "Mitchell's asking for a deal," the handler informed him. "Says he's ready to flip on Thompson and the entire judicial network." Isaiah nodded slowly. "He's scared. Men like Mitchell only tell the truth when they're terrified of something worse than prison." Back in the holding area, Mitchell's revelation had begun. Each word further exposed the intricate web of corruption that had entangled Atlanta's justice system. Names of judges, prosecutors, and high-ranking police officials tumbled from his lips like toxic rain. "Thompson was just the tip of the iceberg," Mitchell explained, his words coming faster now. We had 3 other judges on regular payroll. The drug operations were a cover for something bigger: international money laundering, evidence tampering for cartel cases, witness elimination. Moore's pen moved rapidly across her notepad. Witness elimination? We never did it ourselves, Mitchell clarified quickly. There were specialists, professional contractors who made problems disappear. All we had to do was ensure certain evidence. Never made it to trial. When word of Mitchell's cooperation reached Larson, his reaction exceeded everyone's expectations. In the middle of his own interview, he erupted from his chair, face contorted with rage. That lying bastard. He's the one who ordered the hits. He's trying to pin everything on me. Federal agents rushed to restrain him, but Larson's outburst had achieved one thing. It confirmed there was still more to uncover. The prosecutors now had 2 corrupt officers trying to outbid each other with information, each desperate to secure the better deal. In the courthouse, David Keller prepared for an emergency hearing. The federal prosecutor's office wanted to present the new evidence immediately, ensuring that none of the implicated officials could escape or destroy more records. Tanya arrived at the courthouse with Maya, both dressed formally for what they knew would be a historic day. They found Isaiah in a secure conference room, surrounded by federal agents and CIA personnel. "Are you ready for this?" Tanya asked her brother softly. Isaiah smiled, the same calm smile she'd known all her life. Truth doesn't ask if we're ready. It just demands to be heard. The emergency hearing began with Judge Elizabeth Hawthorne presiding, a federal judge brought in specifically to handle the expanding case. The courtroom was packed with journalists, legal observers, and citizens, eager to witness justice in action. Mitchell was brought in first, his hands and feet shackled. Gone was the arrogant detective who had framed countless innocent people. In his place sat a broken man ready to betray everyone he'd ever worked with. "Detective Mitchell," the federal prosecutor began. "Please tell the court about Operation Clean Slate." Mitchell glanced nervously at the gallery before speaking. "It started 5 years ago. Judge Thompson approached me about helping certain cases disappear. At first, it was small stuff, dropping charges for connected people, planting evidence on rivals. But it grew. How did it grow? The cartels noticed our success rate. They wanted in. Thompson introduced me to some people, international players. They needed a reliable way to move money and drugs through Atlanta. We provided protection, fixed cases, made evidence disappear. Each revelation landed like a bombshell in the courtroom. Journalists scribbled frantically while legal observers shook their heads in dismay. The scope of corruption being exposed was beyond anything they'd imagined. Larson was brought in next, his face twisted with anger at seeing his former partner. Before anyone could stop him, he launched into a tirade that exposed even more corruption. "Mitchell's lying," he shouted. "He was Thompson's right hand. He ordered the Webster killing, the Moore disappearance, everything. I can prove it." "I kept records." The federal prosecutor pounced on this admission. "What records, Mr. Larson?" "Storage unit on Peachtree, Unit 247. Everything's there, photos, recordings, account numbers. Mitchell thought I was too stupid to keep insurance, but I documented everything." Mitchell lunged forward in his chair. "You son of a—" "Order." Judge Elizabeth Hawthorne's voice cracked through the chaos. "Mr. Larson, are you saying you have physical evidence of these crimes?" "Yes, Your Honor. 5 years of evidence. Names, dates, photos, everything. Mitchell and Thompson thought they were so clever, but I knew this day would come." Federal agents were already moving, racing to secure the storage unit before anyone else could reach it. Isaiah exchanged glances with his CIA handler. This was exactly the break they'd been waiting for. In the gallery, Tanya watched the drama unfold with a mixture of horror and satisfaction. Maya leaned against her, clutching her notebook where she'd been drawing the scene in her childish way. "Why are they so angry at each other, Mom?" Maya whispered. "Because bad people often turn on each other when their secrets come out," Tanya explained softly. The hearing continued as more details emerged. Mitchell and Larson, former partners and friends, now competed to expose each other's crimes. With each revelation, the web of corruption grew larger, reaching into every corner of Atlanta's justice system. Judge Elizabeth Hawthorne listened to the testimony with growing concern. As a federal judge, she'd seen corruption before, but nothing on this scale. This wasn't just a few dirty cops. This was systematic corruption that had infected an entire city's legal system. David Keller rose to address the court. Your Honor, in light of these revelations, I move for immediate dismissal of all charges against Isaiah Carter and a full review of every case handled by these officers or heard by Judge Thompson. The federal prosecutor's office supports this motion, Hawthorne responded. Furthermore, we're seeking immediate detention orders for all named officials pending further investigation. Outside the courthouse, news of Mitchell and Larson's testimonies spread quickly. Protesters gathered, demanding justice for all those wrongly convicted. Families of victims held up photos of their loved ones, some of whom had spent years in prison based on fabricated evidence. Inside the storage unit on Peachtree Street, federal agents discovered a treasure trove of corruption. Larson had indeed kept meticulous records, photos, videos, financial documents, even recorded conversations. The evidence was damning and comprehensive. This is beyond anything we expected, Isaiah's CIA handler admitted as they reviewed the findings. These records implicate officials in 3 states. The operation was bigger than anyone realized. As evening approached, the emergency hearing concluded with a series of dramatic orders. All cases involving Mitchell, Larson, or Judge Thompson were to be immediately reviewed. A special task force would be created to investigate every aspect of the corruption, and Isaiah Carter was officially cleared of all charges. But the day's revelations weren't over. As federal agents continued processing the storage unit evidence, they discovered something even more disturbing: proof of international connections. The corruption in Atlanta had been part of a larger network, one that stretched across borders and continents. This is why the CIA got involved, Isaiah explained to his sister later that evening. We knew there were international connections, but we needed proof. Mitchell and Larson just handed us everything we needed. Tanya shook her head in amazement, all because they tried to frame the wrong person. They thought I was an easy target, Isaiah replied. They never imagined they were exposing themselves to federal investigation. Back in their holding cells, Mitchell and Larson were kept separately, each man now a prime witness against the other. Their desperate attempts to save themselves had exposed decades of corruption, ending countless careers and launching what would become one of the largest corruption investigations in Georgia history. Judge Thompson, watching the news from his own cell, realized the full magnitude of what had happened. His carefully constructed empire of corruption hadn't just been exposed, it had been destroyed from within by the very men he'd trusted to maintain it. The federal prosecutor's office worked through the night, processing the new evidence and preparing arrest warrants. With every hour, the list of implicated officials grew longer. The corruption had spread like a cancer through Atlanta's justice system, but now the treatment could begin. David Keller's phone rang constantly as more victims of the corrupt system came forward. Each call represented another life destroyed by Mitchell and Larson's actions, another case that needed to be reviewed and potentially overturned. This will take years to unravel, he told Isaiah, but at least now we can start fixing what they broke. In her temporary chambers, Judge Elizabeth Hawthorne signed warrant after warrant, each one authorizing the arrest of another corrupt official. The evidence from Larson's storage unit had provided the probable cause needed to move against dozens of suspects. We'll need to bring in judges from other districts, she told the federal prosecutor. Almost every judge in Atlanta has been compromised in some way. The CIA's involvement added another layer to the investigation. The international connections exposed by Mitchell and Larson's testimony opened new avenues for investigation, linking Atlanta's corruption to criminal organizations across the globe. This is just the beginning, Isaiah's handler told him. What you started here will have ripple effects for years to come. As midnight approached, the federal building remained active, its lights burning bright against the Atlanta skyline. Inside, teams of agents and prosecutors worked to process the mountain of evidence, each new discovery adding another piece to the puzzle of corruption. Mitchell and Larson, once proud detectives who thought themselves untouchable, now sat in separate cells, each man wondering if his betrayal of the other would be enough to save himself. Their partnership, built on corruption and intimidation, had ended in mutual destruction. In Tanya's living room, Maya finally fell asleep on the couch, her notebook open to a drawing of the courtroom scene. She had captured the moment in her childish way, Mitchell and Larson pointing fingers at each other while her uncle sat calmly watching. "She sees more than we realize," Tanya told her brother, as they looked at the drawing. "Children often do," Isaiah replied. "They see the truth beneath the surface." The truth had indeed come out, revealed not by any single piece of evidence, but by the desperation of corrupt men turning on each other. Mitchell's betrayal of Larson, born of self-preservation, had started an avalanche that would reshape Atlanta's justice system. As the city slept, the wheels of justice continued turning. Federal agents prepared for another day of arrests. Prosecutors drafted more indictments, and investigators dug deeper into the evidence from the storage unit. Isaiah Carter, the CIA agent whose arrest had triggered it all, stood at his sister's window, looking out over the city he'd helped to change. The corruption wasn't completely gone. It never would be. But at least now it had been exposed to the light. Tomorrow would bring more revelations, more arrests, more evidence of how deep the corruption had run. But tonight, in this quiet moment, he could appreciate the irony of it all. Mitchell and Larson had thought they were choosing an easy target. Instead, they had chosen the one man who could bring their entire corrupt empire crashing down. The turning point had come, and there was no going back. Atlanta's justice system would never be the same, and it had all started with two corrupt cops making the biggest mistake of their careers, trying to frame a CIA agent who had been watching them all along. The tension in courtroom 3A could be cut with a knife as the jury filed back in after deliberations. Though everyone knew this was largely a formality, given the explosive revelations of the past few days, protocol demanded that Isaiah Carter's fate be officially decided by 12 of his peers. Isaiah sat at the defense table as composed as ever, while Tanya gripped Maya's hand tightly in the front row of the gallery. The courtroom was packed to capacity, with journalists and spectators cramming every available space. Even the standing room at the back was filled with federal agents and police officers, some there to maintain security, others to witness the historic moment. Federal Judge Elizabeth Hawthorne surveyed the crowded courtroom before addressing the jury forewoman, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed chamber. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The forewoman stood holding a single sheet of paper. Her hand trembled slightly, but her voice was firm. "We have, Your Honor." "What say you in the matter of the state of Georgia versus Isaiah Carter?" "On all counts we find the defendant." She paused, her eyes meeting Isaiah's for a brief moment. "Not guilty." The courtroom erupted in cheers and applause. Maya jumped up and down, while Tanya wiped tears from her eyes. David Keller clasped Isaiah's shoulder, grinning broadly. But the day's drama was far from over. Judge Elizabeth Hawthorne raised her hand for silence. "Order in the court. Mr. Carter, you are hereby cleared of all charges. You are free to go." She turned to address the federal prosecutor. "Is the government prepared to proceed with the next phase?" Rachel Moore, the federal prosecutor who had helped expose the corruption, stood. "We are, Your Honor. Federal agents are in position to execute the remaining arrests." As if on cue, the courtroom doors opened, and a team of FBI agents entered. They moved with practiced efficiency toward Detective Mitchell and Larson, who had been required to attend the verdict reading. "Ryan Mitchell, Scott Larson," the lead agent announced, "you are under arrest for conspiracy, corruption, drug trafficking, witness tampering, and violation of civil rights under color of law." Mitchell, who had already betrayed his partner in an attempt to save himself, stood quietly as he was handcuffed. Larson, however, made one final desperate attempt to control the narrative. "This is all a setup," he shouted, trying to back away from the agents. "Mitchell was the mastermind. He ran everything." His voice cracked with panic. "Thompson ordered the hits. I was just following orders." His outburst only served to confirm his guilt to anyone who still harbored doubts. Two agents firmly restrained him as he continued to rant, leading both former detectives from the courtroom in handcuffs. Isaiah finally allowed himself to relax slightly, watching as justice caught up with the men who had tried to destroy him. Tanya and Maya rushed forward to embrace him as soon as the judge gave permission, their family reunion drawing emotional smiles from even the most hardened observers. "I knew you'd win, Uncle Isaiah," Maya declared proudly. "Heroes always win, in the end." Outside the courthouse, the scene was electric. News cameras captured the moment as Mitchell and Larson were led to waiting federal vehicles, their expressions a stark contrast to the smugness they'd shown during Isaiah's arrest. Protesters who had gathered to demand justice cheered as the corrupt officers were driven away. Catherine Morrison, the CIA's chief legal counsel, approached Isaiah as he emerged from the courthouse. "Well done, Agent Carter. This operation has exceeded all expectations. We've already begun coordinating with international law enforcement to pursue the cartel connections." Isaiah nodded, maintaining his professional demeanor, despite the cameras tracking his every move. "What about the other victims of their corruption?" "The Justice Department is establishing a special task force," Morrison explained. "Every case Mitchell and Larson touched will be reviewed. David Keller has agreed to help coordinate the legal response." Keller, who had joined them on the courthouse steps, added, "We're already receiving calls from other jurisdictions. This could expose similar corruption rings across the country." The afternoon brought a wave of additional arrests as federal agents moved against the remaining members of the corrupt network. Judges, prosecutors, and police officials who had enabled and profited from the corruption found themselves facing federal charges. In a secure conference room at the federal building, Isaiah reviewed the operation's results with his CIA handler. The intelligence gathered would help dismantle criminal networks far beyond Atlanta's borders. "The cartels lost more than just their police protection today," the handler noted. "We've identified their money laundering routes, their evidence-tampering networks, everything. This is going to hurt their operations across the Southeast." Meanwhile, at the Atlanta Police Department, a different kind of revolution was taking place. Honest officers who had been silenced by fear were finally speaking out. Officer Sarah Walker, who had tried to report corruption multiple times, found herself appointed to a new internal affairs task force. "We're cleaning house," the interim police chief announced at an emergency press conference. "Every officer will be thoroughly vetted. Every complaint will be investigated. The era of corruption and intimidation is over." Tanya's coffee shop had become an impromptu gathering place for journalists and supporters. She served free coffee to celebrate, while Maya proudly showed anyone who would listen her drawings of the trial. The little girl had captured key moments in her artistic way, including a particularly striking image of her uncle standing tall while Mitchell and Larson were led away in chains. As evening approached, Isaiah finally had a moment alone with his family. They sat in Tanya's living room enjoying a quiet dinner away from the media circus. "I still can't believe you're a CIA agent," Tanya said, shaking her head. "All those times I worried about you being too quiet, too reserved." "I wanted to tell you," Isaiah replied softly. "But keeping you in the dark was the only way to keep you safe." Maya looked up from her drawing pad. "Will you have to go away now, for another mission?" Isaiah shared a glance with his sister before answering carefully. "Sometimes I have to go help other people, Maya, but I'll always come back. Family is what we fight to protect." The news coverage continued nonstop, with national networks picking up the story. Political commentators debated the implications of such widespread corruption, while legal experts explained the unprecedented nature of the case. "This isn't just about two corrupt cops," one analyst explained. "This case has exposed systemic failures in our justice system. The reforms coming out of Atlanta could become a national model." In federal custody, Mitchell and Larson were processed and separated. Their cooperation had earned them some consideration, but both men still faced decades in prison. Their attempts to blame each other had only strengthened the case against them both. Judge Thompson, watching the news from his cell, realized that his judicial career was over. The evidence provided by Mitchell and Larson had exposed years of bribery and corruption. His only hope now was to cooperate and hope for a slightly lighter sentence. David Keller's office was overwhelmed with calls from other lawyers and families of people wrongly convicted by Mitchell and Larson. Each case would need to be carefully reviewed, each injustice methodically corrected. "It's going to take years," Keller told Isaiah, "but we're going to fix what they broke. Every person they framed deserves justice." The FBI's evidence team continued processing the mountain of documentation recovered from Larson's storage unit. Each file revealed new connections, new crimes, new victims of the corrupt system. "The scope is staggering," the lead investigator reported. "They weren't just framing innocent people, they were actively protecting major criminal operations. The drug trafficking alone spans multiple states." As night fell over Atlanta, the city buzzed with a mixture of shock, anger, and hope. The exposure of such widespread corruption was devastating, but it also represented an opportunity for real change. Community leaders were already calling for comprehensive reforms and independent oversight. Isaiah received word that his next assignment was being prepared, but for now, he could take time to help ensure the cleanup in Atlanta was thorough. The CIA recognized that his blown cover had yielded unprecedented results. "Sometimes," his handler told him, "the best operations are the ones that don't go according to plan." Your arrest exposed corruption we didn't even know existed. In their separate cells, Mitchell and Larson faced the first night of their new reality. The former partners who had once thought themselves untouchable now couldn't even look at each other. Their betrayals and accusations had guaranteed that neither would ever see freedom again. Tanya closed her coffee shop late that night, the last customers finally departing after hours of excited discussion about the day's events. She found Maya asleep on the shop's couch, her notebook open to a new drawing. This one showing her uncle with a cape, standing guard over the city. "She sees you as a superhero now," Tanya told Isaiah, showing him the drawing. He smiled softly. "The real heroes are the ones who never lost faith in justice. People like you, who kept believing the truth would come out." The next morning's headlines told the story in bold print. "Justice prevails, CIA agent exposes massive police corruption," and "Corrupt cops face federal charges as hero agent cleared." But the human stories behind the headlines were what really mattered. Families torn apart by false arrests were being reunited. People wrongly convicted were receiving news that their cases would be reviewed. Officers who had been forced to participate in corruption were finally free to tell the truth. Isaiah watched the sunrise from his sister's porch, reflecting on the strange path that had led to this moment. When he'd been assigned to investigate corruption in Atlanta, he never imagined it would end like this. His arrest, intended to silence him, had instead given him the perfect platform to expose the truth. Maya joined him on the porch, clutching her ever-present notebook. "Are you going to keep fighting bad guys, Uncle Isaiah?" He pulled her close, choosing his words carefully. "There will always be people who abuse their power, Maya, but there will also always be people who stand up to them. That's what really matters." Across town, the federal task force was preparing for another day of arrests and investigations. The corruption Mitchell and Larson had exposed went deeper than anyone had suspected, reaching into city halls and courthouses across the state. But today, at least, justice had won a significant victory. The truth had finally come out, and Atlanta would never be the same. The corrupt system that had seemed so powerful had been brought down by its own arrogance, by the assumption that no one could stand against it. They had chosen the wrong man to frame, and in doing so, they had triggered their own downfall. Isaiah Carter, the quiet CIA agent who had brought it all crashing down, allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The battle wasn't over. It never really would be. But today, the good guys had won. As morning light filled the city, people began to gather again outside the courthouse. Some carried signs demanding reform. Others simply came to witness history. The news cameras continued their vigil, documenting each new arrest, each new revelation. Inside the federal building, teams of prosecutors and agents prepared for another day of unraveling the corrupt network. The evidence seized from Larson's storage unit had opened dozens of new leads, each one promising to expose more corruption. Isaiah knew his work in Atlanta wasn't finished. The CIA's interest in the international connections meant he would be involved in tracking down the cartel links. But for now, he could take satisfaction in knowing that justice had been served. The city was already changing. Officers who had once looked the other way were now speaking out. Judges who had ignored corruption were being held accountable. The system that Mitchell and Larson had manipulated for so long was being reformed from the ground up. As Isaiah prepared for whatever would come next, he knew that the impact of this case would ripple far beyond Atlanta. Other corrupt officials in other cities would learn to fear the quiet observers in their midst, never knowing when their own crimes might be exposed. The house of cards had collapsed, and from its ruins, something better could be built. A system based on justice rather than corruption, on truth rather than power. The long process of healing could finally begin. The federal courthouse stood silent in the early morning light, a stark contrast to the chaos of the previous weeks. Inside a maximum security courtroom, Ryan Mitchell and Scott Larson faced their final judgment. Gone were their crisp detective uniforms, replaced by orange jumpsuits that marked their new reality. Judge Elizabeth Hawthorne, brought in from Washington, D.C. specifically for this case, looked down at the two former officers. Her expression betrayed no emotion as she prepared to deliver their sentences. The crimes committed by both defendants represent an unprecedented breach of public trust, she began, her voice carrying throughout the hushed chamber. Through their actions, they not only betrayed their badges, but undermined the very foundation of justice in this city. Isaiah Carter sat in the back row, deliberately staying out of the spotlight. Beside him, David Keller took careful notes. The attorney had become the lead coordinator for reviewing hundreds of cases tainted by Mitchell and Larson's corruption. Ryan Mitchell, Judge Hawthorne continued, for the crimes of conspiracy, drug trafficking, evidence tampering, witness, intimidation, and civil rights violations, this court sentences you to 40 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Mitchell's shoulders slumped slightly, but he remained silent. His betrayal of Larson had earned him some consideration, but not enough to save him from spending the rest of his life behind bars. Scott Larson, for similar charges, with the addition of attempted obstruction of justice during these proceedings, this court sentences you to 45 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Larson's face reddened with anger. This is because I didn't talk fast enough, isn't it? Mitchell's just as guilty. Remove the defendant, Judge Hawthorne ordered calmly. As federal marshals led Larson away, his angry shouts echoed through the courtroom. Outside, reporters clustered around the courthouse steps, waiting to break the news of the sentencing. The case had captured national attention, becoming a symbol of the fight against police corruption. Catherine Morrison, the CIA's chief legal counsel, approached Isaiah as the crowd dispersed. The sentencing is just the beginning, she said quietly. The intelligence we gathered has already led to arrests in 3 other cities. Similar corruption networks are being exposed across the country. Isaiah nodded, his mind already processing the implications. The cartels will be looking for new protection. They won't give up their operations easily. Which is why we need you back in the field, Morrison replied. But first, the director wants to meet with you personally. Across town, in a newly established Federal Task Force office, teams of investigators continued processing evidence from the corruption case. The contents of Larson's storage unit had opened dozens of new leads, each one exposing more layers of corruption. Officer Sarah Walker, now promoted to lead the department's new integrity unit, supervised the cataloging of evidence. Every file we open reveals another case that needs to be reviewed, she told her team. These men didn't just frame Isaiah Carter, they spent years destroying lives. At Tanya's coffee shop, the atmosphere was celebratory. Regular customers mixed with journalists and activists, all discussing the implications of the case. Maya had set up a small art display in the corner, showing her drawings of the trial and its aftermath. Look, Mom, she called out excitedly, pointing to a local newspaper. Her sketch of Uncle Isaiah standing tall while Mitchell and Larson were led away in handcuffs had been featured in their coverage. Tanya smiled proudly, but her joy was tinged with concern. She knew her brother would soon leave for another assignment, returning to the shadows where he worked best. In the federal detention center, Mitchell and Larson were being processed for transfer to separate maximum security prisons. Their requests to be housed in protective custody had been granted. Former cops wouldn't last long in general population, especially cops who had made so many enemies. I hope it was worth it, a guard commented as he fingerprinted Mitchell. All those lives, you ruined, and for what, money? Mitchell said nothing, but his eyes held a haunted look. The full weight of his crimes and their consequences was finally settling in. David Keller's office had become the central hub for reviewing cases tainted by the corruption. Lawyers worked around the clock, examining trial transcripts and evidence logs, identifying cases that needed to be reopened. We've already identified 50 cases with clear evidence tampering, Keller reported to a panel of federal judges. These people need to be released immediately, and that's just the beginning. The ripple effects of the case spread far beyond Atlanta. Police departments across the country faced increased scrutiny. Citizens demanded stronger oversight, independent reviews, and real accountability. In Washington, D.C., congressional leaders called for hearings on police corruption. Isaiah's case had exposed vulnerabilities in the system that could no longer be ignored, but not everyone celebrated the changes. In a private club downtown, a group of powerful figures met to discuss the implications. Judges, politicians, and business leaders who had benefited from the corrupt system now faced an uncertain future. This goes beyond Mitchell and Larson, one man said, his voice low and worried. If they keep pulling these threads, there's no telling what might unravel. Isaiah received their surveillance photos later that day, along with a coded message from his handler. Opposition forming. New players emerging. Stay alert. At the Atlanta Police Department, the interim chief addressed his officers, outlining new accountability measures. Body cameras would now upload automatically to secure federal servers. Internal affairs would report directly to an independent oversight board. The old way of doing things is over, he declared. We either embrace these changes or find another line of work. Some officers resigned rather than face increased scrutiny. Others welcomed the reforms, tired of working in a system where corruption flourished while good cops stayed silent. Tanya's business thrived in the aftermath of the case. Her coffee shop became known as a gathering place for justice reform advocates. She used her platform to help other families affected by police corruption, creating a support network for those still fighting to clear their names. Maya started a letter-writing campaign to imprisoned victims of Mitchell and Larson's corruption. Each letter included one of her drawings and a message of hope. Uncle Isaiah says the truth always comes out, she wrote. Don't give up. The CIA's interest in the case intensified as international connections emerged. The corruption network hadn't just protected local drug operations. It had been part of a sophisticated cartel infrastructure spanning multiple countries. We've identified similar patterns in major cities across the Southeast, Morrison told Isaiah during a secure briefing. The cartels are adapting, finding new ways to infiltrate law enforcement. Late one evening, as Isaiah prepared to leave Atlanta for his next assignment, he received an anonymous text message. You exposed one head of the Hydra. Watch for the others. The warning was followed by surveillance photos of several prominent Atlanta officials meeting with known cartel associates. The images were taken after Mitchell and Larson's arrest, suggesting the corruption network was already trying to rebuild. In his sister's living room, Isaiah shared a final meal with his family. Maya presented him with a new drawing, this one showing him as a guardian angel watching over the city. Promise you'll come back, she said, hugging him tightly. I promise, Isaiah replied, knowing that his work would always bring him home, eventually. Someone has to keep watching out for the truth. Tanya understood better now why her brother lived the life he did. Just be careful, she said softly. There are still people out there who don't want the truth exposed. The next morning, Isaiah met with his CIA handler in a secure location. The evidence from Atlanta had opened new avenues of investigation, revealing corruption patterns that could help identify similar networks in other cities. The cartels are already adapting, the handler explained, spreading photos across the table. They're being more careful about who they recruit, how they maintain control, but they're also getting desperate. Desperate people make mistakes. Isaiah studied the photos carefully. They'll try to rebuild here first. Atlanta's too important to their operation to abandon. Which is why we need to maintain surveillance. Your cover may be blown, but your work here created opportunities we never expected. In the federal prison system, Mitchell and Larson began serving their sentences in separate facilities. Neither man would ever wear a badge again, never again have the power to destroy innocent lives. But their legacy lived on in the lives they'd ruined, the families they'd torn apart. The federal task force continued discovering new cases, new victims of their corruption. David Keller worked tirelessly to right these wrongs. Each case reopened, each conviction overturned, represented another small victory for justice. "It's not just about freeing innocent people," he explained to a group of law students who'd volunteered to help review cases. "It's about restoring faith in the system, showing that justice may be delayed, but it doesn't have to be denied." The Atlanta Police Department underwent a complete transformation. New leadership, new policies, new oversight mechanisms, all designed to prevent another Mitchell and Larson from rising through the ranks. Officer Walker's Integrity Unit became a model for other departments. She trained officers to recognize and report corruption, creating a culture where silence was no longer an option. "The blue wall of silence protected criminals wearing badges," she told her trainees. "That wall needs to come down, brick by brick, if necessary." In his new office at the federal building, Isaiah reviewed intelligence reports suggesting the cartels were already testing Atlanta's new defenses. They'd lost their police protection, but they hadn't given up on the territory. "They'll lie. Try something soon," he told Morrison during a secure call. "The question is whether the reforms will hold." The warning signs appeared gradually. Small-time drug dealers growing bolder in certain neighborhoods, money flowing through new channels, whispered conversations in back rooms about rebuilding, lost connections. But this time, eyes were watching. The CIA, FBI, and honest local officers maintained constant surveillance, ready to stop corruption before it could take root again. Tanya noticed subtle changes in her neighborhood, new faces appearing at odd hours, expensive cars cruising slowly past her shop. She kept Isaiah informed, knowing that even small details could be important. Maya continued drawing, her artistic style maturing as she processed everything she'd witnessed. Her latest series showed the contrast between corrupt officers in shadows and honest cops standing in light. "She understands more than we think," Tanya told Isaiah during one of his check-ins. "She sees the battle between good and evil playing out every day. The battle wasn't over. It never really would be. But the exposure of Mitchell and Larson's corruption had changed the playing field. The people of Atlanta had seen behind the badge, had witnessed both the worst and best of law enforcement. Isaiah's work continued, though now in different cities tracking different corruption networks. The lessons learned in Atlanta helped expose similar operations across the country. But he always kept one eye on his hometown, knowing that the forces of corruption never really went away. They just adapted, evolved, looked for new weaknesses to exploit. Late one night, as he prepared to leave for another assignment, Isaiah received one final message from an unknown source. "The war isn't over. It's just beginning." He smiled slightly, thinking of Maya's drawings, of Tanya's courage, of all the lives changed by the exposure of truth. The message was right. The war wasn't over. But now, at least, people knew they could fight back. The truth had won this battle. Justice had been served. And somewhere in the shadows, Isaiah Carter continued his work, knowing that the next fight was always just around the corner. In Atlanta, life moved forward. The courthouse stood as a symbol of both corruption exposed and justice restored. Mitchell and Larson's names became cautionary tales, reminders of what happens when power corrupts and truth prevails. But in dark corners and quiet rooms, new threats were already emerging. The hydra of corruption never truly died. It just grew new heads. The stage was set for new battles, new challenges, new opportunities for truth to triumph over corruption. And Isaiah Carter would be there, watching, waiting, ready to expose the next threat to justice. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. If you enjoyed Isaiah Carter's journey of bringing down Atlanta's corrupt empire, hit that like button and subscribe for more thrilling stories of justice served cold. But here's a question to keep you up at night. In your city, right now, How many Isaiah Carters are silently watching? How many ghosts walk among the corrupt documenting their crimes, waiting for the perfect moment to strike? Tell us in the comments. This is Hope Core, where justice is always worth the wait.